The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast NH. This is a podcast designed by writers for writers on the journey to being published. Joined Mandra, Biscornet.
It was so healthy and nutritious.
Deborah Monk.
Can we open each podcast with a dance number?
Shelley Devlin.
It was so full of inspiration and sparkles.
Every Tuesday morning live on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to catch the podcast anytime on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Podbean, Spotify, or your favorite podcast catcher. It's time to be inspired, feel empowered, and be well with the Writer's Block Podcast NH.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast. I'm Mandra.
I'm Debbie.
And
that's some funky music. I kind of like that.
And Shelley, you have a beard today. You're always changing your hair. We're just not used to facial hair.
It's very disco, isn't it, our music?
I think
it's
I
like
like
70s
it.
disco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say porn music, but I don't want to say that because we're live.
I'm going to
I'm
we'll
glad
go with
you
disco.
All right.
And we are streaming live on Facebook from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, so be sure to check us out there. We've got a guest, if you haven't noticed, with us today.
It's way too early to be a guest on anybody's show. I just want you to know that right up front.
Well, Mr. Tom Duggan, we are happy that you rolled in to be a guest on our show today.
That's an accurate description. Rolling in, barely rolling in.
The life of a writer.
Exactly. So we're just going to keep feeding Tom coffee and talk about a whole bunch of publishing and writing and all things related to that. Tom is an author of a book called Heroes in Our Midst, which he so kindly gave us both a signed copy of today. So we're going to talk about that process. He's also the publisher of the Valley Patriot, a local newspaper, and he hosts his own podcast called Paying Attention right here at Studio 21. That's on Thursdays, Tom?
Thursdays, yep, 2 o'clock.
Thursdays at 2. So you can check him out there as well. So, Deb, you've been thinking of some
Yes, I
good
have. Well,
questions
my
to
first
ask
question
Tom.
I wanted to know is, what do you think being a journalist helped your writing style for writing a book?
It does. I mean, there's different kinds of writing, and I've been writing since I was a kid. I've been writing for a really long time. And most people write about things that they care about. They write about things that they like. And journalism writing is very different because you have to write about what happened, whether you like it or not. You have to write about stories that, I did a front page story 3-4 years ago about corruption in the what do they call those fire plugs, fire hydrant industry, and it turned out that the town of Tewksbury was basically skewing their bids for fire hydrants towards certain companies because those companies were giving goodies to all their DPW workers down at the yard.
Okay.
And so this guy calls me and says, I'm the competitor. And then, so I had to do all this research on fire hydrants, way more than I ever wanted to know.
way more than you were interested
Way
in
more than I
knowing.
ever thought I would know about fire. I know more about fire hydrants than just probably anybody else on the planet at this point. And I hated it. I hated the story. I hated writing it. I hated researching it. I had no interest in any of this. But the guy that asked me to do the story and told me about it was a friend.
Yep.
And he was right. He was a fire hydrant manufacturer. He made his parts in China. He made his fire hydrants in China. And the Mueller company in the United States, there's only 2 companies in the United States that make them. Mueller's one of them. Makes their parts in China and then ships them here and assembles here and calls it made in the USA. So there was this big controversy as what's made in the USA going on at the same time that this story was going on, and I hated every minute that I spent on this story. I did 2 follow-ups on it. But it gives you a discipline to be able to continue to go back to the keyboard and continue to put words on paper and continue to rewrite it and edit it and fine-tune it. And
Even if it's not something.
Even if it's not something you're... In fact, what I found over writing for the newspaper for the last 15 years is that the stories I'm least interested in actually turn out to be more objective journalism than the stuff that I'm writing about that I do care about. I'm interested in immigration. I'm interested in taxes. I'm interested in politics. And when I write about those things, I try to be as least biased as I can when I'm writing it.
Yeah. But it's tough.
But because I have strong opinions about it, that is going to bleed in somewhere.
Yep.
Which is why it's always good to have other people look at your work too. As a side note, But to answer your question, yeah, it's the journalism part is you have to be disciplined. You're on a deadline. You have to write it by a certain time, and it's not always going to be something that you want to write about. And once you've done that a number of times, it gives you more discipline and makes you a better writer. Because now you can take something that you find the most boring friggin' thing in the world and make it sound interesting.
Wow.
And that's what writing is. I mean, most of the real writing happens in the editing process. I'll draft out 5 pages for a 1-page story. It'll end up 1 pages, and I will just throw everything up against the wall, everything that I can think of, every quote that I got, everything, and then I'll start fine-tuning, and I'll go back and I'll re-edit and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit.
And then you pare it down to that 1 page.
So the real creative genius when you're writing is in the editing process, not the writing process. The writing process is just raw. It's raw you, whatever you're writing about. You know, if you like, Hummels, whatever it is that you're interested in. Did I touch on a topic I shouldn't have? Just pick something random, right?
That's really
if you're going to write about Hummels, if you're going to write about whatever it is you're interested in, you want to write as much as you can. You want to get as much as you can, because it's a lot easier to take stuff out and edit than it is to add things in later on that you may have forgotten. So I just try to throw everything. When there's a shooting in Lawrence and I go and I do a story, I write every single detail from the color of the house to what kind of rims were on the car in the drive-by. And most of that won't end up in the story, but I put it all in there because as I'm editing it and as I'm paring it down, sometimes one of those facts will jump out at you and it will become relevant, and you didn't realize it when you first started putting pen to paper, so to speak.
And don't you think, so I always think, well, then that means the genius is in the writing, because, I had the wherewithal to observe that. But the idea that most real writing is done in the editing, or that the real genius is in the editing, takes the idea of editing, which is so, the writing's fun, the editing sucks.
Right.
But for you to kind of switch it up, that's
Right.
really interesting. I'm going to go try to edit something today and just see if I can go in with that attitude instead of this sucks.
Yeah.
Huh.
See, I could sit and do 5 pages in 20 minutes and then spend the next 3 days editing it until it's really what I want it to be. We wrote a story in this edition of the Valley Patriot about the Columbia gas explosions and how the people of Lawrence responded to it, which I don't think anybody had written from that point of view. And I think we were at somewhere around 2,300 words by the end of that column. It started at 8,000 words. It started at 8,000, and then I pared it down. And then at one point I thought, well, maybe this is 2 stories. Maybe I can get 2 stories out of it once I pare this down to 2,300 words.
Yeah.
There's all this other stuff that happened that nobody's written about. So I actually saved that draft, and that may be like a part 2 in the next edition, because I think there's so many other things that happened that I didn't get a chance to talk about for space reasons. And one of the problems that I have with journalism writing in a newspaper is you're stuck for space.
Right.
There's a huge limitation on space, and I tell my guest columnists all the time, like, listen, if it's over 800 words, I'm going to send it back to you, and you're going to have to cut something out.
How do you become a guest columnist?
You got to be cute, and
Give 'em coffee.
You have to flirt. You have to flirt with the owner. And if you're cute and you flirt with the owner, you got a really good shot.
How about
You gotta
cookies?
guess column.
Cookies might work. You have to pretend that you like the owner, because he thrives on female attention. So if you pretend, even if like you're married and he knows you're never ever ever going to do anything, just the fact that you flirt back gives him that 1% chance of hope, and then he's going to let you do whatever you want.
Interesting. Now, what does a man consider flirting? Eye contact?
Yeah, well, a lot different than what
That's
women
a
consider
different
flirting.
show.
Right, yeah. A lot different than what women consider flirting. Like, I think I find something beautiful in every woman I meet. And so
Well, there's a good line right there.
Yeah, that's good
a great
flirting,
line.
actually.
Yes, that is great flirting.
Oh, good job. You
Thank
kind of
you.
slipped it in there. We
Thanks.
didn't even notice.
Thanks, I'm here all week. Tip your waitress.
Because she's beautiful.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I find something beautiful in every single woman that I meet. And I also know that in this culture, women are very sensitive about their looks. So I always try to compliment. If I see a woman, even if someone else looks at them and they say, oh, she's 300 pounds and she dresses poorly, and I look at it and I go, wow, but she did her hair so great. I'll go over and say, you know what, I really love what you did with your hair, and hope that I maybe made her day.
And I bet you would.
And if she doesn't like slap me, I consider that flirting.
If she doesn't slap you. Okay. Interesting.
Right?
Oh, gosh. Tell us, while we're on the paper, tell
Yes.
us how that all got started.
Well, even before, let's go back to before that. How did you start writing?
Right, he's been writing.
My parents are going to kill me for saying this, but I was in a lot of trouble when I was a kid.
Shocking.
And it wasn't what today you would consider trouble. It wasn't like drugs or alcohol or any of that stuff. But I was always in trouble. I was in trouble in the neighborhood. I was getting into fights. I was always doing stupid things. So I spent a lot of time in my room. And the progressive punishment in my family was, first, you're grounded. You have to be in your room for a day. Then the next time you do something wrong, the TV comes out and the stereo comes out. We didn't have computers back then. We didn't have iPhones back then. Right. The TV and the stereo came out of your room, and then you had nothing to do. Like, you were there in the room all day with nothing to do. Well, I had a typewriter, and I used to have to write reports for school at Lawrence High School. It was always like mandated that you type your reports, double spaced, whatever. So I had all these books. I belonged to Book of the Month Club, and all these books. So I started reading books, and then writing my next book report that probably wasn't due for like 2 more semesters, but I had nothing to do anyway. So I might as well why not do it? And I started writing. Then I started writing stories. Like, I'd sit at my typewriter and just make up stories. I would write like fictional stories. And as the punishments got worse and worse.
So you can thank your parents.
I wrote, well, yeah, in a way,
yes.
And your bad behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I actually had a term paper business in high school.
A term paper business?
Yeah.
Where he wrote term papers for people?
I was devout my first 2 years, and I used to get beat up a lot because I was a big mouth. Like, who knew? And I transferred to Lawrence High at the beginning of my junior year, and my first day, a guy on the football team grabbed me and put me up against a locker and said, "Hey, new kid, how about your lunch money?" or something like that. And I said, "Listen, how about I'll give you my lunch money, and I'll write your next term paper," because I already had like 20 of them written. They were in my room, right? I'd already written them.
Yeah, filed,
ready
to go.
I'm like, and I'll guarantee you like an A or a B. And if I write your papers for you, could you promise to make sure no one does this to me again? And I still know his name, and by the way, he's still alive and he's still around, so I'm not going to say who it was. But I ended up writing his papers through like all of junior year and senior year in high school. And the football team, anytime somebody screwed with me, it was like, that's the guy that writes our papers for us. Don't screw with that guy.
Do not break his fingers.
This is like a movie.
Yeah. I got caught. Miss Bootlier was my junior English teacher, and she caught me selling a paper in the hallway. And she sent me down to Miss Horner, the principal. I sat there all day. You know how they make you just sit there all day and wait and wait and wait.
I've
and she
never
finally,
been sent to the principal.
No, I was there a lot. I was bad. And I sat there, and she finally called me and she said, "Mr. Duggan." And she was like old as dirt. I mean, she was just so old. She was like, had to be in her late 80s. And she's, "Mr. Duggan, you've been caught selling term papers. And I'm going to call your mom, and we're going to suspend you, blah, 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 blah." And being the great liar that I was in high school, I started thinking like real fast, like, how do I get out of this? And I said, well, I don't understand. You guys mandate that we type our papers, and these football players, they don't have typewriters. So they just give me their papers, and I type them for $1 a page.
Wow.
And now I'm getting in trouble for that? And she looked at me like all befuddled, like she wasn't sure if I was lying, but she couldn't prove that I wasn't lying, and she didn't want to punish me just in case. So she sent me back to class. My English teacher just lost it. She was like, "I caught you, and she's sending you back here." It was a big controversy, but I ended up not getting in trouble. And then when I went to college, I kind of did the same thing. I found kids that, weren't really that good at writing, and I helped them with their papers for a fee. It was a very horrible thing for me to do. And I'm sure I'll never be able to get on the Supreme Court now, because now that I've admitted to it, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, just to answer your question, I loved to write, and because I spent so much time alone in my room when I was a kid, I read a lot of books and I wrote a lot of stuff. And sometimes I'd pick up the Eagle Tribune because I was a paper boy, and I'd read a story and I'd find mistakes. And I would sit at my typewriter and I would rewrite it the way I thought it probably should have been written, not just changing the mistakes, but like rewriting the verbs and rewriting the content of it.
And then did you send that to them?
Well, I actually sent a letter to the editor to them once, letting them know how horrible I thought they were and correcting all of their stuff. And they never published it, and they never got back to me. So
I would have thought they'd hire you.
Yeah. Well, I did write for the Tribune's student page when I was a senior in high school. And I wrote one story. I got an award for it. And I was like, well, I wrote one story, I got an award for it. So like, what's the sense of sticking around here? Like the whole point of students joining was to get that award, to get like the Student Writer of the Month award. And I got it my first story I wrote. So I was like, well, there's no sense in being here anymore. Let's go do something else.
Do you have a lot of writer friends?
I do. I have. I never used to, but now that I've been in the newspaper industry for almost 15 years, it'll be 15 years in March. A lot of writers have found me. Kenny Tingle, who I grew up with in Lawrence, wrote a novel called The Girl in the Italian Bakery, which is a true story. He's calling it a novel, but it's about this girl that he fell in love with at Fizzicelli's Bakery in Lawrence. I don't know if people remember Fizzicelli's. And he just kind of like dropped in out of the sky one day and said, "Hey, remember me from high school? I wrote this book. Would you like to do a book review?" And, you know, the last thing in the world I now want to do at 50 is go back to what I was doing when I was 13 and do book reviews, right, and do book reports. It's like the last thing in the world I want to do. But he was a friend, so I said yes, and we put it in the paper, and then all of a sudden all these other writers that I knew that I never knew were writers started coming out of the woodwork and saying, "Hey, I wrote a book too," or "I'm thinking of writing a book, and what's your recommendation on how I do things?" And so yeah, the short answer is yes, but not by design.
Huh. So if journalistic, because I've been asking a lot of my friends, how do I become a better writer? You know, and one of them who wrote for the Boston Globe said, you need to do some journalistic writing because everything you said. The one thing she didn't say, which is I can totally see the point, is that you have to write about stuff you don't care about.
Right.
And I don't want to do that.
Right. Nobody does.
But so I would think at this point that you would want to not be doing journalistic writing and doing...
No, because it makes me a better writer. Like, no matter how good of a writer you think you are, at whatever age you are or however long you've been writing, there's always room to get better.
Absolutely.
There's always a way to get better. And one of the things that I think most writers don't truly understand is your job as a writer is to put mental images into people's head. You're putting words on paper that are going to conjure up in people's heads a mental image. And you want...
Or evoke emotion.
Oh, that's true. Okay. Right. Through the mental images.
Okay.
But you want the majority of the people who are reading what you're writing to have the same or similar mental image in their head. You don't want to write something like political writing. You write something, and liberals will read it one way, and conservatives will read it a different way. And most writing is not like that. That's kind of like the anomaly in things because we live in a very
divided,
bipolar culture at this point. But what you really want, especially if you're writing a book, if you're writing stories and fiction, you want people to have basically the same mental image in their head. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing something wrong. And you've got to go back and you've got to figure out how it is that you reword things so that that doesn't happen.
So do you have stories in you? Do you want to?
My goal in life is to make enough money on this newspaper so that I can just write books and never do anything else. I just want to stay in my office, not talk to people. I hate people. I don't know if you've noticed that, if you've seen my show. I hate people. But I would love to be able to make enough money in the paper to hire someone to do the layout and stuff that I do right now.
And you could write.
And just write books. I mean, I could write a book about, there's a million things. My dad was a police officer. He was murdered in the line of duty. I would love to write that book. I've wanted to write that book for a long time, but because I'm so emotionally attached to it, every time I try,
that's going to be a tough book to write.
It becomes something that I put aside and don't want to do anymore because it evokes a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And I've been doing politics and I've been doing political stuff, consulting, public speaking for a long time, and chasing police calls in Lawrence and going to shootings and fires. And I think there's probably at least 10 books in me.
Absolutely.
But I don't have A, the time, and B, the money. Because whatever time you're spending on that, you're not spending time on things that make you money, like the newspaper and public speaking and books and stuff like that.
Right. But let's talk about this book.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell us how this came about, because this is a collection of stories, right?
Yeah. So we're approaching our 15th anniversary of the Valley Patriot in March, which is amazing to me because I didn't think we were going to make it 15 weeks. Like literally when we started this, when we started this paper, it was myself at the time and my girlfriend at the time. And we started the paper with the idea that I was going to go out on unemployment. I was working in Boston radio. I was doing morning drive time at WTTT, Salem Communications. And I said, maybe I can get myself laid off, go on unemployment, and we're going to start this newspaper. Because by the time unemployment runs out, the paper will probably have failed and I'll have to go back into radio and go back into doing Boston. And we were in the black from day one. And so anyways, at the 13-year mark, almost 2 years ago, I have a warehouse. I've saved one bundle from every edition of every newspaper we've published, and we have a warehouse. And we put them all face down in the warehouse. So when you open the warehouse door, you're seeing the bottom half of every paper. And on the bottom half of every newspaper, the Valley Patriot, is our Valley Patriot of the Month. We focus on one veteran who has not only gone off to war and done something spectacular, but then came back and continued to contribute to their community. That's the criteria. Okay. Not just that you're a veteran and you served, but then when you came back, you did stuff to help other veterans, or you're in for state rep and you push veterans bills or whatever. And I'm looking at, and I opened one day the storage unit, and I'm looking at all of these pictures of all of these local veterans, most of whom I know and have interviewed myself, and thought, wow, we've got like 13 years of veterans' stories. why don't we put it together, put it in a book, and then give the money to like Veterans Northeast Outreach or one of these veterans groups that helps homeless veterans.
Right.
And so that's what we did.
Wonderful.
We went through and re-edited a lot of the stories. I wrote some of them. The best ones are not written by me. I'll tell you in full disclosure. We have 3 writers that were just so amazing back then. Dr. Charles Ormsby wrote some really amazing stuff. Lonnie Brennan wrote some really amazing stuff. Even Ted Tripp wrote some of them that were just, really so compelling that by the end of it, you're like, oh, God, I hope there's a part 2 coming.
Yeah. Well, it's like a treasure of stories.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And what route, because we're always interested in what route did you take to get it published, to get it all together?
It was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. In the old days, getting a book published was the hardest part. I basically went through all of our old notes and all of our old emails and submissions of all of the stories that we had already published, opened up like the InDesign program, pulled out the text, pulled out the pictures, put them in Word documents, re-edited them, and then you go on Amazon and you upload your book, you upload your content, you sign up. It's like a 1-day, 2-day process, and then within 2 or 3 days, your book goes live. You design your cover, and your book goes live. Like I said, in the old days, the hardest part was getting it published. Today, the hardest part is marketing it. So once I got the book up, once the book was online, now how do you get people to buy it? Right? And so thank God for Facebook. Thank God for social media, because I've got maybe like 15,000 people that follow me on Facebook. I've got 5,000 friends. They top you off, and then I've made my page public. So I've got another 11,000 people, 12,000 people that follow me that can't get in on my friend list.
Right.
And so I just started pumping it on Facebook. I created a Facebook page for the book. Okay. And I started having book signings and inviting like my famous friends to come. Like Al Caprillian's a friend of mine, and he calls me all the time. And by the way, that should be a book in and of itself. If I could record one phone call from Al Caprillian, you guys would die. It's the funniest thing in the world. Because I answer the phone, good evening. And he says, good evening. We do good evening back and forth for like 10 minutes before we actually talk about what we were going to talk about.
Boys.
Yeah, right? I'm just like, still feel like I'm a little kid,
but you know that guy,
right?
like, that's his voice. It's hilarious. Yeah. He does the weather.
So I invited like people that I knew that were semi-famous or famous, locally famous, and then promote that they would be there to get more people to come. It's always some kind of a gimmick when you're promoting something, whether I'm promoting the paper, whether I'm promoting the book, whether I'm promoting, if I'm doing public speaking somewhere. I always try and find some other thing, some shiny object to get people's attention, because in today's white noise world of social media and news and television, people are bombarded with so much information that you've really got to find tricky ways to get their attention and keep their attention long enough for them to register whether it is they want to go to an event or do something or buy a book or to do something.
Yeah.
Oh, paying attention. Someone should
do a podcast.
Yes, that sounds like a great name for a podcast. Well, speaking of that, we are...
speaking of marketing.
Speaking of
shameless
marketing.
plug.
Ed, we are going to take a quick walk around the neighborhood.
Oh, are there cute girls in this neighborhood? I'm a single guy.
There are usually 3 of us in the neighborhood, right? We're going to take a walk around the neighborhood and visit with Deb for most of it, because you have quite a bit going on with your marketing.
Well, I know I've been working hard. I don't know how much I have going on, but I will say that part of last week I was feeling a little bit down because the sales part doesn't appeal to me. The writing and sharing of myself is easy, but then once you having to go out and say to somebody, okay, now I want you to buy it, I'm finding it torturously, just complete torture. So one of the things I did is I have created wine glasses and coffee mugs, which I've talked about on the show. And in the past month, I've been able to get into 7 stores.
Nice.
Yes. And I just want to say I went to a Casual Cat, Cindy in Milford. Cindy and Lisa were so kind. They completely helped me with the packaging, which I think Ed has the pictures, and he's going to put those up. They let me come back time and time again until we got it just right. And then Jill at Silly Jilly in Milford and Peterborough, her store, when I went to deliver to them, she was so kind on the phone. I actually sent her a note afterwards just thanking her for being so kind. When I went in and I met the person that was working, Alice, she asked me what my book was about, and I had Wings and a Tail with me as well, and I told her, and she got a tear in her eye. Oh. And so then I got a tear in my eye. And it just reminded me that I don't do this for the sales, that I'm doing this so that I can touch people. Lynn at Mac & Co. in Andover, she is also, so there are pictures of some of the displays, I think, that our dear Owl has. I'll be doing a book signing there on, I believe it's Wednesday, November 14th at 7, from 7 to 9. The Covered Bridge in Billerica, which is just a store that's reopened with Barbie, Tracy, and Tina. It is literally a little fairy tale cottage in the middle of the woods.
Right. We were just talking about that off
where
off
writers
camera.
should live.
I
Yes.
actually thought of asking them. I kind of went around the store hoping I could find a small closet that had a window and that I could rent that and just
Right.
go right there. I grew up in Billerica, but I've never been to this place. It used to be
Nice.
called the Wiffle Tree. So a cute. Oh, there you can see the picture.
Is there smoking on this show, by the way? I hate
Sure.
to interrupt you. All right.
And then I'm also down at Sisters We 3 in Newburyport and Toadstool Bookstore in Milford. So been making the rounds.
So you're in quite a few
Toadstool,
places
great.
now.
Yes,
That's
and so
great.
you can buy. It comes as a set, as the book and the coffee mug, or a book and a wine glass. Well-behaved woman coming undone.
Yep.
Makes a great gift for, especially for guys. They can go in, just pick up the bag, and off you go. It's wrapped. It's in
You're
a
gonna
little
make it easy
organza
for
bag.
men.
I did
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's like a
literally
book with
packaged.
merchandise
It's already
all
wrapped.
packaged.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
think there's a picture. Yeah, there's a picture.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Very good.
So-
yeah, see, as a guy, I would buy that.
Right. Well, you know what? Hint. I think I should talk to Dave. Maybe I'll talk to Dave next week.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly. Have them right down by the cigars.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's
And-
been a great. It's been good.
It's been busy.
It's been very, very busy, and I'm not writing at all, which of course
I know,
made me
you-
grumpy.
Right.
So yesterday I spent a couple hours writing, and Mandra's going to read it for me today.
I am a leader.
Yes.
I love that meme that you guys have on your Facebook page. I actually shared it yesterday. Write. How did it go? God, I'm not going to be able to do it.
it was
now
one
'cause,
of Shelley's
It was something like write until not writing gives you anxiety.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Which is, it's so true.
Yeah.
But that's what you hear. Like, if you want to be a better writer, just keep writing.
Right.
Keep doing it. And being a journalist, you're forced to do it
Right.
all the time. You know? And where can we find your book, Tom?
You can get us on Amazon. We're on Barnes & Noble. It's called Heroes in Our Midst, from the pages of the Valley Patriot. We're actually working on volume 2 right now, because we stopped this on our 13th anniversary, and we're getting ready to celebrate our 15th anniversary, which means we have 2 years of veterans that we haven't covered.
Yep.
And we're going to try and throw in some other stuff that we didn't fit into this book because there just wasn't enough room.
Yep.
This is already like 800 pages.
Right. That's
Yeah,
a
it's a
big
big
book.
Little too, but it's great because it's all short stories. So each
It's quick.
each chapter is like 2 or 3 pages. So you can read maybe the first 3 chapters, put it down, go back a week later. You haven't missed anything because they're all different stories.
Right.
That's great.
Well, it was wonderful. And
Yes. Thank
you're-
you so
yes.
much for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. Is it
early.
over already?
We do have to wrap
Wow.
up. So thank you all for listening. Excuse me. Thank you to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. And please check out the Writer's Block NH Facebook page, the Writer's Block Podcast, on your favorite podcast catcher. May you be inspired, feel empowered, and be well.
Yay.
Attention cigar smokers, or even friends of a cigar smoker. If you're looking to relax with a nice premium cigar or looking for a great gift for a cigar smoker, this is the gift that keeps on giving. Our friends at twoguyscigars.com have created the Cigar of the Month Club. For just $19.99 per month, you or a friend will receive 4 different premium handmade cigars every month, and shipping and handling is included.
Contact twoguyscigars.com. That's the number 2, guyscigars.com, and go to the Cigar of the Month Club. You can stop anytime because there's no contract, but you won't. This is a tremendous deal for our listeners. Go to twoguyscigars.com. That's the number 2, guyscigars.com, and click the Cigar of the Month Club.
At the same time, if you want to learn more about the cigars you receive each month, you can smoke along with them on our own podcast called The Cigar Authority. Sit back, relax, and enjoy a nice premium cigar from our friends at twoguyscigars.com.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.